On my computer, yeah. Yeah, we're off.
Now, okay, so I'm Chris Johnstone, and I'm really interested in what you're doing. So I don't know if you just want to introduce yourself and tell me a bit about what you've been doing with the work that Reconnects, Active Hope, and related processes through online.
Yeah, okay. So I'm Paul Wielgus. I'm a mindfulness meditation teacher, and I've been working with meditation-based interventions with organizations and corporations for the last 25 years. Very recently, I've moved on from that, and I've got much more interested in climate emergency, and as a result of that, started to invest more time in work that reconnects. From a specific angle, I've started. So I'm a Buddhist, but my specialism is secular Buddhism, especially when I bring it into the world. So I've been working with Jamyang Buddhist Centre in Bath and in London about bringing meditation-based approaches to work that reconnects type kinds of activities. So to give you an example of that, I've just finished, started in March, a 4-week weekly teaching program around, we've called it Active Hope, but it basically was a mindfully facing climate emergency, using some of the Buddhist techniques, but incorporating work that reconnects and Active Hope practices. So it ran for 3 weeks. I was about to do the 4th week, which was entitled Climate Emergency as a Path to Awakening, when the coronavirus came in. So that was hastily converted to an online proposition, emergency training in Zoom, and it went remarkably well. I mean, and so as a consequence, the sort of finale of that course, I'd planned to run a full day Active Hope session. And we converted that just to a short, I think it's a 1.5 hour session around some just very simple techniques. But we took people around the spiral in that time. And again, that was exceptionally well received. And so I'm actually moving on from there, just introducing a mindfulness for resilience and joy program. And we have an intention to look at an extended version of the Active Hope session within the next few weeks. So that's kind of where I am at the moment.
And had you had experience of doing online facilitation before?
Yeah, I used to have a big client who basically was in Johannesburg with leaders across Africa. And I do personal coaching as well. And I've coached him for years, and he's always kind of been one of the people that's responded to mindfulness training. So I went over there to run some leadership sessions, both in Joburg and in the Middle East for another part of his operation. And I used to do weekly mindfulness training, basically online, using GoToMeetings, which was the platform I'm more familiar with than Zoom. And again, that was really, really impactful. But I think the technology of Zoom is much better with the breakout rooms, etc. So I think that offers something more than perhaps the things I've used in the past. So my experience, yes, I have experienced quite a lot, but it's been kind of simple experience of delivering mindfulness practices to groups of people, and also as a coaching tool as well, one-to-one.
And just recently, you had 2 face-to-face programs that were brought to a halt by the whole lockdown, stay-at-home measures that we've needed to carry out. And you said you used the phrase "exceptionally well received."
Yeah, I think I was surprised. Sorry, go on. Let's finish your question. Yeah.
No, I just thought. Well, I was going to ask that. Were you surprised?
Yes. Although I'm going to put a caveat on this. the people who weren't very technophilic or were technophobic were delighted when we managed to get them on to some kind of dinosaurs really kind of were like, oh my goodness, it works. So that was good. And I think the technology surprised people, to see everybody on the screen, to have the breakout rooms, which I love dearly. And so the feedback, I think people, bearing in mind because of self-isolation, I think people are really responding well to being able to be online. However, I will say I'm hearing increasingly that people are being on Zoom calls, might count for you as well, 5 or 6 hours a day. And I believe there's an element of Zoom fatigue coming in. And I personally believe that we can get very creative, and I've seen you do this as well, Chris, so you know where I'm coming from, with our use of Zoom. So, for example, when I do the mindfulness for resilience and joy, one of the behaviors I'm doing on the very first course of that is mindfully managing Zoom meetings and trying to encourage that creativity and variety and diligence about how long we try to hold people online. So I think that's a challenge for everybody, because everybody's Zooming here and Zooming there right now. And I think we need to get more creative and more sensitive to how we do that, and really access our creative imagination to help people not get bored of it, and not get too de-energized and lose the nourishment of it. So what I'm saying is basically there's a novelty factor we have to take into account is wearing off with the online way of delivering things.
And what have you found works particularly well?
Right. Get people into breakout rooms almost immediately. So, sometimes this round everybody, if you've got 24 people and you ask them to check in, and it can take about an hour. And I think it's actually not good use of time. So, for example, specifically, we'll open a meeting and open up, if you've got 24 people, 6 breakout rooms, let them check in with 2 or 3 other people. That's sufficient. Another thing I've kind of rediscovered, and I tried it out with a couple of small groups I run this week. There's a process called havening, and it's neurologically proven that if you do it, and basically what it is, the basic move is you kind of give yourself a hug, and for 5 or 10 minutes, this is one of the moves. You stroke your arms like this. And one is it gets you into a meditative state, but also 2, it starts to trigger the oxytocin. They prove this, and oxytocin is the cuddle hormone. So you're kind of getting some more intimate touch, through virtual. So I'm experimenting quite a lot with that at the moment, because I think if we can get people actually feel, the nearest to actually getting to have a hug without hugging someone, it's worthwhile persevering. I've done it twice, small groups, and they both come back and said that. And one of them was a group of people who live on their own. So yeah, those sort of things. And I'm sure there's a raft of other creative ways we can introduce. Those. So the other thing is having short periods of meditation, the breakout room, and also being very sophisticated with our mixing of people in the breakout rooms, and making sure we're getting a mix of people, rather pressing the button for the spontaneous one once is okay, but if you just press it again, you get the same people going into the same rooms, and I think that this is a trick. So stuff like that.
So that means you do manual setting up of the rooms, and you choose who's in which rooms with who else.
Well, possibly do the automatic one for the first split, because that's quite nice. There's something about just the surprise of who you're going to be with, but then just making sure subsequently you're mixing people so they're getting different people in the room. I thought it was a random thing, but it's not. If you've got 24 people, you break them into 6 groups of 4, and then you do it again, you'll get the same groups. Which
right. So really helpful to learn some of your tips along the way.
Yeah.
And you've been using so some of the terms you've been using, and the three that kind of stand out are mindfulness, active hope, and work that reconnects.
Yes.
And you talked also about mindfully facing climate change.
Yeah.
And I'm just kind of wondering, like, how you introduce what you're doing and how you introduce some of the terms you're using.
That's really good. I mean, bearing in mind that the Mindfully Facing Climate Change was a group of Buddhists. So to give you a bit more detail of what that 4-week course was about, is that I took some of the early Buddhist teachings and what could they teach us about climate change or ecological emergency, because there are things in there. Then I looked at the secular version of that, and then I looked at the active hope. So I had this mix of different kind of viewpoints about climate change. Now, there are some Buddhist the essence of Buddhist teachings and climate emergency, and Joanna's a Buddhist, so this won't surprise you, but the truth of impermanence, is one of the stronger, and teaching that is like, this too will pass. COVID-19 will pass. And so, if we can learn techniques to really start to get closer to that, and impermanence leads to death as well. So, with a lot of approach about getting into relationship with death, which is much more positive than our Western mentality, is really important. The whole idea of interconnectedness or interbeing come from Buddha's teachings. And the essence of it is saying, and the way I would start the Buddhist version of this program, but I would do it with non-Buddhists as well, is saying it's not what we do about climate emergency. It's not really about what we do. It's how we relate to it. And we don't have control of what's happening, but we do have a control of how we relate to what's happening. And there are some very positive ways that we can nurture within ourselves and train ourselves to be in relationship with climate change. And to almost the extent that, from a Buddhist teaching, Buddha was the awakened one, we can help our own process of coming into presence, into consciousness, into awakening by such a challenge as COVID-19. I think it's a really positive thing that's happening. It's desperately sad that there's people dying, but also there's a huge lesson for us to learn, and it will help us when we have to again face the existential crisis, ecological crisis. We will be better equipped for that from what we're learning now. So there are those sort of issues coming into the workshops and the training that I'm doing.
So there's what happens is what happens, but one area of choice is how we relate to what happens. Yeah. And there are better ways of relating and less helpful ways of relating.
Yes.
And how would you describe the difference? So a better way of relating is...
Okay, so Viktor Frankl, there's a very famous phrase that he's the Holocaust survivor that you'll know, wrote Man's Search for Meaning, and he's attributed with the quote that in the gap between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space is our freedom to choose. And in fact, that's the only freedom that we possess as human beings. If we're not conscious, if we're not awake, if we're not mindfulness, which is what we can train to be, we're subject to our reactivity, our conditioned behavior. So the difference between the two is reactivity and response. And what mindfulness training does is help us to create that gap in which we can make choices in how to respond. That's the basis of it, basically. And that's what I come back to in the teaching all the time.
I love the way you're expressing this. It's very helpful.
Thank you.
Can I quote you?
You may quote me. Well, all the stuff as long as you don't quote it as original source, all this is kind of coming from the elders and then from the ancient wisdom.
And we're all in a kind of relay race or process where we receive and we pass on, and we do our own process of digestion and contribution along the way.
Yeah.
So one more helpful way is to open up a space where we're less reactive and more choiceful.
Yeah, that's the way of putting it, yeah.
And because I'm thinking about this in terms of the great turning, that there's the great turning as in this big thing that may or may not happen. And there is also the great turning as in a process that can happen in all of us every day, many times.
Yeah.
And it's a turning up is the starting point, turning up with presence,
Yeah.
with that kind of gap that you've described.
Yeah.
And then from that gap is a conscious choosing of what we want to turn away from and also what we want to turn towards.
Yeah.
And so turning away from the kind of reactivity that, particularly when we're under stress and feel threatened, can have greater overtones of hostility and suspiciousness in a way that we're more likely to turn against each other.
Yep.
And if we're going to turn towards something, how would you see that? What we're aiming to support and grow our capacity in terms of what we turn towards, how would you see that?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you take the three aspects of the great turning, the actions, what Joanna calls the pushing back, I think that the elements of turning towards the second bit about building community is our connection and we're seeing this now. I mean, it's tonight we'll all be applauding the great NHS and we'll be acting as a community, and there's a lot of grassroots community building coming, and that's people waking up a little bit to our natural capacity for kindness and compassion. So those sort of qualities like gratitude, it's all in Joanna's spiral, this is why I love it. The capacity for gratitude, the capacity for humility, the capacity for generosity, the capacity for kindness, for compassion, all those we are able through mindfulness practice to cultivate. We can cultivate them. We can rewire our brains because of the discovery of neuroscience. So we can consciously rewire our brains to become more natural and automatic in expression of those capacities. And I think this is what, for me, and I'm probably still a bit of a hippie actually, but for me, this is because this is a spiritual challenge. And the third area, the seeing with new eyes, is about what we have to do is raise consciousness. We can't solve the problems that we have now from the same consciousness that we have, the Einstein quote, and we have to get out of this about new thinking, of which we cannot imagine. For me, the kind of tools of creating that new thinking are both the practice of mindfulness and the place of mindfulness, of being mindful. So we do mindful things to become mindful, which is the same as awakening. It's the same as becoming conscious, and in that consciousness we go back to the very practical difference between reacting and responding. We have a fantastic, it's only recently we've known that we can even witness our own experience. In the evolution of 5 billion years or whatever, it's only in the last half a second that mankind has realized we can, we have self-awareness, we can witness what's happening, and therefore we can actually make choices about how we direct that. It's astonishing. I don't think we've really recognized the kind of colossal power of that we've got, and that's something I think we've within us is part of our evolution, and it'll probably be what determines whether we can create a new society, new way of being, not be extinguished. So
yes. So some of the terms, so mindful facing is opening up a gap, and you talked about the great turning in terms of these 3 dimensions, and you particularly looked there at the second dimension, but you've also in that kind of alluded a bit to the other 2 sides. Is there anything more you'd like to say about the great turning, the way you see that?
Well, I mean, we know the kind of 3 possibilities, and we know business as usual, status quo is just not possible. I still think it's on a knife edge whether we make it, but again, through the practices that one of the things I've learned through the Buddhist practice, that we should do the work without expectation. So I talked to you about the tyranny of expectations, that this work is so difficult, and if we allow us, and it's very difficult as a human being not to have expectations, but if we have grand aspirations for this, we're going to go flat on our face, be disappointed and fail. And for me, it's very helpful to try and do the work that we do because it's the right thing to do. And basically, what I'm talking then about is that it's an ethical project. It's not about trying to build something and have great aspirations that we'll be very happy when we've built it. We've just got to do it because it's the right thing to do. And if we can help ourselves understand that, then we can, again, that then brings you back into the present moment. We can really enjoy our experience, and we can really use our learning, our failure as learning. And I've heard you say this, so I'm sure you relate to this. What was it I heard? It's the Accidental Gods. I don't know if you come across the stuff that they do. It's about consciousness evolution. And they were saying, and if we don't get there in the end, we can sit back and know at least we were able to find the better self within us. That's the least outcome, that we can hope for. And hopefully, and saying hopefully sort of assigns, like expectations, but stay open to possibility then. It keeps us open to possibility if we can engage with that kind of mindset. So, yeah.
Yes. So how do you see active hope? And how do you introduce that to people?
Because people, there's the collapsologists and everyone, and I don't know who's right. So, and I always say that we don't know what the answer is, and there are a range of possibilities of outcomes. The Jim Bendel stuff, the deep adaptation kind of outcomes, and none of these, you can choose actually. So for me, I choose active hope, because it's not just wishful thinking. This hope is a 4-letter word. So, the idea that we need courage, not hope. But I really love active hope because basically it says, to me, it does say stay open to possibility and do the best you can possibly do and go for it. But avoid setting yourself, the traps of measurement. And I think that talks to people. It keeps the energy level at a way of, okay, I'll still invest in this. I'm not going to crumble into despair and give up. I'm happy to keep going because there's something I can continue to believe in and to do. I heard something really wonderful about hope. I really can't remember where this comes from, but it said hope itself, is a bit like David and Goliath. Have you heard one? And as David's going out with his little slingshot, going out to tackle this huge beast, somebody says to him, "Oh, I hope you'll be okay." And you think, the size of that task is just not helpful. But the active hope has got this movement in it, and it's got a structure and a process, and a community that invest in it. So it's why it really speaks to me. And people loved it in the Jamyang community as it brought people to the workshop. It sounds there is hope, but there's something we can actually do as well that attracts them to it.
Yes, I love hearing you speak, Paul.
Thank you.
And I love that sense of, can we make something happen? And there's a kind of, can I, can't I? Maybe I can, maybe I can't. But also, if we get too attached to an expectation of making something happen, we can lose heart if we don't see it happening.
Yeah.
We can think, what's the point? It's futile. Whereas active hope is about making something more likely to happen through our actions.
Yeah.
It's about moving in a direction, even if we don't get all the way there. And it's about saying, what do I hope for? And how can I put myself behind that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, yeah.
And I agree with you that I come also across people who take a position against hope and see it as unhelpful, and I can see what they mean. But also, this is why I think, there's what happens, but there's also the story you tell yourself about it. And part of seeing with new eyes is about refashioning concepts, recasting stories. And just as we need a new story of self and a new story of power and a new story of community and time, we also need a new story of hope that is not about exactly as you've really identified, getting too attached to expectations of what we hope for in a way where we might lose heart and give up hope and give up making the effort if we don't see it happening anytime soon.
Yeah. Margaret Wheatley, I listened to a podcast of hers recently, and she's on about this hope or no hope, and she said it's not about whether the glass is half full or if the glass is half empty. It's who needs the water. And I just thought, yeah, that to me is active hope. It's just saying, yeah, let's just get real about what we need to do and do it.
Yes. What are the needs here?
Yeah.
And how can we be active in doing what we can towards meeting them?
Yeah.
And sometimes what we can do might seem pitifully small, but I just love this idea of emergence, that when you look at a newspaper photograph under a magnifying glass, you see lots of dots that are really tiny.
Yeah.
And if you say, what can that dot do? You might think not much. But when you say, what is that dot part of? Then you take a step back and you see a larger picture that emerges through the dots. And it's that's the seeing with new eyes. It's seeing in a different way. And that's why I love this question, what can happen through us?
Yeah.
What are we part of? And we're part of a story, and a story can happen through us. And that's why I love the story of the Great Turning.
Yeah.
I love this idea of the Great Turning were to happen through me right now. What would I be doing? What would I turn away from? What would I turn towards? But how would I turn up in a way where I've got enough presence of attention to be able to make better decisions?
Yeah, I think that's really nice. I really like the way you put that, Chris. That totally in accord with that. Actually, that's a really excellent way of explaining what we're here to do.
Great, good. Yeah. And it emerges through conversation.
Yeah.
I find that the more I talk about it and the more I hear other people talking about it, there's a sifting process where, and I think this is why in terms of our own training, to be really interested with each other, saying, well, okay, some of the terms that are important reference points, how do you see them and how do you describe them to others? And for us to be constantly practicing with each other, but also, I think one of the great things about Zoom is when we press a record button is that we can also be generating content.
Yeah.
And it might be that we have a half-hour conversation where there's just 30 seconds in there where you think, that was good. Mm-hmm. And it might be something you said or I said or something about the interaction between what each of us said. Mm-hmm. But then we can start collecting those. And then it's interesting, this word transmissibility or contagion. Somebody was a bit concerned that I talked about, can we make active hope more contagious than the virus? Yeah. And I don't know, it's that thing about, triggering words, but I think there is a reality to contagion of beliefs and habits and behaviors, and how we can be more conscious about what we transmit, what we pass on, and look at being better at passing on what we'd like to continue, and also better at stopping passing on what we don't want to continue. In some ways, the virus is a call to attention about the issue of transmissibility.
Also, this idea of you get this idea of virus is bad. That we're alive because of viruses. I don't know what the plural is actually. Viruses. The benign virus, is something that keeps us alive. And if we didn't have virals, then we wouldn't be here now. And who's to say that in the bigger picture that COVID-19 is not a benign virus? We don't know that. What's it preventing happening by being here? So I like contagion, and I think it's you choose the meaning of your language, don't you? And I think where you've expressed it, I agree with. It's what happens, and contagions in human interaction is a very the meme idea. The idea of a meme is a virus.
Yes.
Yeah, and then we spread good news and good things, and bad news and bad things through memes, which are viral. So I think it's really legitimate to use that kind of language and change the meaning of the language. That's the important thing.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Paul. I'm so grateful for this time. I'm so pleased to meet you more. I also just want to, we're kind of coming into landing time. Is there anything you'd like to say as part of drawing to a close?
I just want to thank you for the opportunity to talk about this, because I realise it, probably I should do more of it and accept the invitation to talk about it, because there is a process of discovery, for me in talking to you about this. So I appreciate, lots of gratitude for inviting me into this space. And thank you.
Is there anything you wouldn't want shown anywhere else?
No.
What I'll probably do is I'll probably put it on Vimeo, and then I'll do a bit of editing,
Yes.
and then there might be bits of this that go towards something, but I found it really helpful hearing you. And also what we draw out of each other as well.
Good. I hope this is just the start of a journey, Chris.
Yeah, well, it is.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah, good. I look forward to more, Paul.
Okay. I'm going to stop